an answer to what, why, and hows of newspaper reading. Today I am going to discuss Delhi edition dated 14 December 2017 of The Hindu. So let's get started. Now, if we look at page number 1, there is an important news which says EC notice to Rahul for TV interviews. Now, this is a very important news concerning the process of elections which are currently underway in Gujarat. So, let's look at this news in detail. Now, if we look at this news, it appears at two places in the current newspaper, at page number 1 and at page number 10. Now, what is the news? The news says that Election Commission has issued notice to a political leader as his interview on Gujarat polls was aired by many TV channels. The news also says that the Election Commission has directed the Gujarat Chief Electoral Officer to register FIRs against all the media houses for airing this interview, and they have been asked to stop airing it immediately. Now, the important question is that why the Election Commission issued such a notice and order. Now, according to Election Commission, both these entities, the political leader as well as the several news channels, have violated Section 126(1)(b) of the Representation of the People Act 1951. Now, according to Election Commission, the interview fell under election matter under this section, and display of any such election matter within 48 hours of second phase of assembly polls in Gujarat amounts to violation of this provision. The Election Commission also says that this particular interview has violated the Model Code of Conduct. Now, important questions to be asked under this article are: who gave this power to Election Commission to issue notices to political leader or registration of FIRs against TV news channels? The answer to this question is Article 324 of the Constitution of India. Now, this article gives the power of superintendence, direction and control of conduct of elections to Parliament and Legislature to the Election Commission of India. The other question which arises from this article is, what is Model Code of Conduct? Now, the Model Code of Conduct is a set of guidelines issued by the Election Commission for conduct of political parties and candidates during election, like what kind of speech they are going to give, what kind of manifestos they will issue, and their general conduct. And this has basically been designed to avoid communal clashes or corrupt practices during the process of election. Like, any political leader should not give a hate speech. Any political leader should not propose a project which is very vague just to sway the voters in the favor of their parties. Now, an important feature of the Model Code of Conduct is that it has been evolved through the consensus of all political parties, and they promise that they will abide by the Model Code of Conduct till the completion of elections. Besides that, the Model Code of Conduct comes into force immediately on announcement of election schedule by the Commission. So let's look at this article from the exam point of view. From the exam point of view, we can frame questions from two perspectives, from pre and mains. From the pre point of view, they can ask that elections are conducted under which act of the Parliament? Is it Representation of the People Act 1951 or Representation of the People Act 1950 or any other act? The answer is RP Act 1951. So what is the difference between RP Act 1951 and the Act 1950? So basically, the RP Act 1950 provides for allocation of seats, delimitation of constituencies, the qualification of voters, preparation of electoral rolls, etc. Whereas the conduct of elections is dealt by RP Act 1951. The other question which can be asked in pre is, what is Model Code of Conduct? And we know that it is a set of guidelines formed by consensus of the political parties and which comes into force immediately after the announcement of election schedule by the Election Commission. The third question which can be asked is the power of Election Commission under the Constitution, which is Article 324. From the mains point of view, this article gives us a broad understanding of the election process as well as the provisions of Representation of the People Act 1951. So let's move to another news. So if we come to page number 1 again, there is one more important news which says prepare plan mapping air pollution sources, says SC. Now this news basically talks about air pollution, which is an extremely important topic with respect to both prelims and mains. So we'll look at this topic in detail. So this news has basically two components. The first news is that SC has asked Centre to notify a comprehensive action plan to map all sources of pollution for Delhi and NCR region. The second part of the news is that the SC has also asked the centre to come up with timelines to implement all the action points of the plan which currently lies with EPCA. So basically there are two most important things to understand from this article. First, we are going to talk about the sources of Delhi pollution. And second, we are going to understand what is EPCA. Now, we all know that Delhi has seen a severe smog crisis in last 2 months, and many sources have been attributed for this problem. So, if we consider this as Delhi air, then we have various sources. Now, some people said that this was due to stubble burning. Now, this stubble burning basically refers to the burning of residues of rice crop from the past Kharif season. And because the wind flows basically from Punjab, Haryana to Delhi, all these pollutants were transferred into Delhi NCR region. Combined with extremely low wind and high humidity condition, these pollutants stayed here and gave rise to severe smog problem. So these would be attributed to climatic conditions. The other sources of pollutions are more familiar ones, which is first the vehicular pollution, then the industrial pollution, then the construction activities which release a lot of particulate matter into atmosphere. So now we all want that Delhi should have a clean air, there should be no smog problem, there should be no pollution problem in Delhi. And for these to happen, it is extremely important that we know what are the contributing sources for these pollution. Which is the more bigger contributor? Is it the stubble burning, or is it the industrial pollution, or is it the construction activities? Until and unless we have a very specific data of these contributions, we will not be able to take a comprehensive measure or action against these. So therefore, Supreme Court has asked the centre to map all the sources of pollution for Delhi and NCR region so that actions could be taken. Now, the second more important topic is, or equally important topic is EPCA. What is EPCA? Now, EPCA is Environmental Pollution Prevention and Control Authority. Now, this body was formed in 1998 on the recommendations of Supreme Court, basically on the order of Supreme Court to the central government. Another important point is that EPCA has been formed specifically for Delhi NCR region because Delhi NCR region has more severe problems of pollution than any other part of the country. Now, this body called EPCA has been submitting various reports since 2003 to the Supreme Court of India so that measures can be taken to control pollution in Delhi. And now it is responsible for implementing a plan known as Graded Response Action Plan to address the problem of Delhi pollution. Now, this Graded Response Action Plan was notified by the Environmental Ministry in January 2017, and this plan basically proposes various short-term, medium-term and long-term measures to address the problem of Delhi. This Graded Response Action Plan, as the name suggests, divides the air pollution into various grades based on the amount of PM matter 2.5 and PM matter 10 in the air. Now, this PM 2.5 and PM 10 refers to particulate matter, that these are particles which are smaller than 2.5 microns and 10 microns in size, and they are extremely hazardous to human health, and it pollutes the environment a lot and causes problem to people who suffer from asthmatic or other lung problems. The infants and the old aged are particularly vulnerable to higher amounts of PM 2.5 and PM 10 in the atmosphere. Now, this graded action plan classifies the air into severe, very poor, poor and moderately poor categories and recommend actions accordingly. Now, this graded response action plan takes about various actions which can be taken. For example, odd even policy, ban on entry of diesel vehicles in the city, ban on construction activities. It also talks about various long-term measures like increasing public transport like metros or BRTS, moving industries out of the Delhi NCR region, and regulating the various industries. And then there are many other measures also, like you can increase the parking fees, or like the Supreme Court banned the sale of crackers on Diwali, etc. Now, these all measures are extremely good one, and they tackle the problem of Delhi pollution in a very comprehensive way. Therefore, the Supreme Court has asked the central government to come up with timelines so that each of these actions could be implemented. And Supreme Court has asked the centre to respond in 2 weeks. Now, if we look at this article from the exam point of view, there are various things which can be asked in prelims. For example, they can ask what is EPCA. They can also ask what are PM 2.5 and PM 10 particles, which we now know they are particulate matter of extremely small sizes, that is less than 2.5 micron diameter or less than 10 micron in diameter. They can also ask what are the health hazards caused by these particles. Then they can ask what are the various sources of pollution for Delhi NCR region. They can also ask what is the graded response action plan and which is the agency which is responsible for implementing the plan. From the mains point of view, they can basically ask what are the sources of pollution for Delhi NCR region, and they can also ask what are the various short-term and long-term measures which you can suggest to tackle this problem. So this completes our pollution article. Let's move on to the next article. So our next article is on page number 8. We'll deal with the first editorial, which is The Outsider. Now this article basically deals about the law of adultery, which is an important social issue and which has serious implications on the status of women and gender neutrality of our laws. So why are we discussing this news? We are discussing this news because recently this Honorable Supreme Court of India has decided to look into the constitutional validity of Section 497 of IPC, which is basically the law of adultery. So in order to understand the whole editorial and the news, let's first understand the concept of adultery as defined in the Indian Penal Code. So in order to do that, let us consider a couple and let us consider one another man. Now according to section 497 of IPC, any person, whether he is married or unmarried, has a sexual intercourse with wife of another man. Now this is very important. With wife of another man without his consent, and such a sexual intercourse is not a rape, then this is an offense of adultery which is punishable with 5 years term of imprisonment or fine or both, and the women shall not be punished. Now, so Honorable Supreme Court found that there are various issues with this law. First of all, it found that this law is not gender neutral and it punishes only this person who is a male. So it is not gender neutral and it is discriminatory towards men. The second issue which Supreme Court found was that why no offense if a man gives consent, because the law says that if the act is done without the consent of this man who is the husband of this woman, only then this is a crime of adultery, not otherwise. So what happens to the status of crime when this person gives his consent? Now this provision, according to the Honorable Supreme Court, reduces women to a subordinate status. It does not give equal status to both husband and wife, and it is the husband whose will is ultimately going to decide the future of the case. The third question which Supreme Court asked was why this is a crime when it is a consensual act between the two individuals, because according to section 497 this is not a rape. So any consensual activity between two adult individuals cannot be a crime. Now the Supreme Court has agreed to look into the matter again. In its previous judgment, the Supreme Court had held that women is a victim and this man is the criminal who has committed the crime single-handedly. The Supreme Court has also held that women enjoys a special protection because she is not punished for the crime of adultery because she enjoys special protection under Article 15(3) of the Constitution. Now this article allows special provision for women and children even if they are discriminatory in nature. The Supreme Court has also held that this law is non-discriminatory in nature. Why? Because the husband can prosecute only this man and he cannot prosecute his wife. So there is no injustice done to women in this law. Besides that, even if this husband is involved in consensual relationship with another woman, then also there is no opportunity or no option for this woman to prosecute her husband. So there are no options available to both of them to prosecute their disloyal spouses. So this is non-discriminatory in nature. So clearly the Supreme Court has to settle many issues with respect to this act. First, the gender neutrality of this act. What about the culpability of the wife? The subordinate status of the women? Why discrimination between the two when it is a consensual act? Also, adultery is an archaic provision and it does not find place in criminal laws of various countries of the world. Last but not the least, the United Nations Working Group on Laws that Discriminate Against Women also warned countries that treat adultery as crime to repeal such laws. So, finally, what is the way forward which this article suggests? Now, according to this article, adultery can be a basis for divorce, which is a civil proceeding, but it cannot be a ground for incarceration. The article also says that we should not extend the criminal provision to both genders in the name of women empowerment, and the only solution or the only way forward is that you repeal this provision completely. And also, Section 198 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, a provision which is also under challenge in the Supreme Court. Now, from the exam point of view, it is very important question with respect to means, and we have to study this with respect to status of women and gender neutrality of our criminal laws. Now, let's move on to the second editorial of the day, which is IS wars. Now, recently, the Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has declared victory over IS, which basically marks an end to more than 3 years of battle with the deadliest terrorist organization of the world. Now, this article basically talks about two aspects of this victory. First, achievement of victory, and second, it talks about how to prevent resurgence of IS again in future. Now, in order to understand the achievement of victory, let's go back to 2014. Now, back in 2014, around one third of Iraq was under IS control. Its second largest city, called Mosul, was under IS control. Moreover, the situation was so bad that the Iraqi troops ran away, leaving all their weapons behind. But then the current Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi, took over in 2014 and he took a very gradual approach towards IS annihilation. He took help both from US and Iran. First of all, the southward expansion of IS towards Baghdad was stalled. Then cities like Ramadi, Fallujah was captured. And finally, Mosul, which was the crown jewel of IS, was captured. And this was achieved through a 9-month fierce battle with the IS in Mosul. After that, it was very easy for the Iraqi military to capture whole IS controlled territory. Now, this became possible when Iran trained Shia militias and Kurdish Peshmergas took over the IS on ground, whereas the US targeted the Iraqi bastions through airstrikes. This was a joint effort of all these territories, but then the question arises whether IS can come back. The answer to this very question is yes, it can come back, because the bigger challenge towards Iraq is rebuilding the nation post civil war. Now, Iraq is a highly politically divided country. This could be easily understood if we look at this map here. Now, the southern Iraq is dominated by Shia. This region is highly rich in resources, and this has a very peaceful relationship with the government which is sitting in Baghdad, which is Shia dominated. Now, the north and western part of the country is Sunni dominated area, and this is never at peace with the central government, which is Shia controlled. Now, this region is the Iraqi Kurdish state. The Kurdish Autonomous Region recently held a referendum and declared independence, much to the chagrin of the central government sitting here in Baghdad. So it is these political divisions which are to be addressed by the central government. If they are not addressed, then it can turn into a conflict and give a fertile breeding ground to the organization like IS. Now, the Islamic State can easily come back because IS has only lost a territory, the ideology still remains. Besides that, we also don't know about its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, whether he was murdered or whether he still survives. The next most important point is that IS still controls some area in Syria, though it is at a back foot due to Russian and American bombings, but it's still there. Besides that, we need not forget that even Al-Qaeda, which was annihilated in 2006 and 7, which suffered serious military setback, made a comeback as IS when the civil war in Syria was at its peak and the sectarian rivalry in Iraq was in its worst form. So Mr. Abadi has to make sure that this thing does not happen again in future and the IS is dead forever. But this can be done if military is on alert. But the most important thing is that the alienated section of Sunnis and the Kurds are taken along and their problems are addressed. Only then we can make sure that the answer to this question is no. Now, this is an important topic with respect to means because first it helps us to understand the geopolitics of Iraq and how a deadly terrorist organization like IS was defeated through joint efforts of divergent polities like America, Iran, Kurdish Peshmergas, and Iraq. Besides that, it also helps us to understand how we can prevent resurgence of ISIS in Iraq. So now let's move on to page number 13. We are going to discuss this news. Merchant discount rate on cards cannot be abolished, says RBI's Deputy Governor Kanungo. Now the news says that merchant discount rate cannot be done away with. So there are two questions which arises from this article. First is, what is MDR? And second question is, why there is a demand to abolish it. Now, in order to ask the first question, we all know that the government is incentivizing payment through cards and digital transactions to deal with the menace of black money and make a progress towards a cashless economy. Now, you all would have noticed that whenever we go to any shop and make a payment through card, we use a point of sale machine. So this POS, a point of sale terminal, is basically kept by the merchants and they are used for making card payments. So for every card payment, this merchant has to pay a fees which is called merchant discount rate. Now this merchant discount rate is not borne by the customers but by the merchants. And this fees is split into three parts. First, the bank which issued the card. Second, the lender who deployed the machine or the POS terminal. And third is the payment gateway, which are MasterCard or Visa. Now these lenders of POS terminals are also banks like ICICI, SBI, Axis Bank, etc. Now, since this MDR is to be borne by the merchants and not by the customers, they obviously want a very low rate of MDR and they have been campaigning so that the MDR is abolished. They basically demand that if you want to incentivize digital payments, MDR should be kept very low. And why should the retailers bear the cost of digital India? It should be the responsibility of the government and the bank should bear the losses. However, the bank says, and RBI found in its survey that all the banks are bearing losses for deploying these POS terminals. RBI has therefore cleared that MDR will not be abolished. RBI has therefore cleared that MDR will not be abolished and a minimum fees will continue to be levied to make the whole process sustainable. So this ends our discussion for this article. With this, we come to an end to today's newspaper. Let's move on to question for today.